All right, we are continuing on. I think we covered most of what Roger wanted to cover for the first 10 years. We are going to move into high school period now. I believe this is the fifth session that we've gone through so far. Before we get started, Roger, I heard you missed one story that you wanted to share regarding a coal bin, and I thought perhaps you could kick off with that one.
Maybe that would be just as well to eliminate that one, but I'll tell it since you brought it up. I was maybe 5 or 6, and I did something that my mother didn't approve of. She said, "That's bad. I'm going to lock you in the coal bin." And we had a coal-fired stove, of course, and we had a wooden door with just a wooden turnbuckle on it. If I would have been smart at that time, I would have just kicked the door open, but I didn't. So I didn't move much because that coal is awful black, and I think she left me in there for a half hour, and I was obedient the rest of the day.
So 2 questions. Did you learn your lesson?
Well, yeah, I think I did, yeah. I was good for the afternoon.
And do you remember what you did to deserve that?
No, it wasn't appropriate punishment to it.
From your perspective.
That's right.
From your perspective. All right, let's jump into high school. How did your high school career kick off?
Okay, well, the high school, we had 18 in our class. The total enrollment in the high school was 118, so we had one of the smallest classes, and we took the normal courses. We had reading, writing, we had math, we didn't have calculus, and we had English, and we had biology and history and so on and so forth. And I did well in school. I was noted for sharing my algebra work with everybody in my class. I would do my work, and they would come and say, "Could I take a look at your algebra work?" So they would copy my paper. But I graduated from high school in 1944. I was valedictorian of my class, and for that I got a $75 scholarship from Reader's Digest, which I never used because my service obligation came up later on. But I had a nice time in high school. We did trapping, and one of the things about trapping, I had a skunk trap line. I caught a half a dozen skunk one year, and when you catch skunk, it stays with you. And I was sent home from school a couple times to change my clothes because it kind of bothered the school.
The trouble with trying to catch a skunk is sometimes you catch them.
You know, my dad told me, my dad was a trapper, and he said the first time you have a skunk in the trap, you can go right up to him and hit him over the head with your axe. You usually carry an axe with you, and you won't have any problem. Well, I didn't have an axe, so I took a stone, and I missed the skunk, and he didn't like it, and I got the full spray in my eyes. I thought I was going to be blind. Maybe that's the problem I have with my macular now, but it is strong. And I got home, and my mother said, "Dig a hole in the garden. You have to bury your clothes. You can't come in the house with clothes." So she gave me some other clothes to change in the garage, and I dug a hole. And the rule was if you had skunk odor, you buried it in the ground for a couple of days, and the ground would absorb the odor. So, and I got $6 for a skunk hide, and it really wasn't worth it. And I caught muskrat and skunk, and that was my source of income when I was in high school. And you'd get up at obscene hour, like 5 in the morning, and walk the trap line. We didn't have any cars, and you catch a skunk underneath a silo, a fallen down silo or something like that. They're very difficult to get out without getting into trouble. But we made a few dollars with our trapping.
Did you tan the hide and everything yourself?
No, I would skin them, turn them inside out, and make a form to pull the hide on, and then you let them dry, and then you'd send them into Sears Roebuck, and you'd get whatever they decided to pay you. And with a skunk, if they were a real narrow white stripe, you got more money for them. If you had a wide white stripe, you didn't get much money for them. So.
And you shipped them. You literally put them in a package.
Yeah, and go to the post office and wrap them up. And my dad was a trapper when my mother worked in the post office, and he would bring his hides in there, and he would never have them wrapped very good, and she would always have to re-wrap those before they sent them in. But that's how they met, I guess, over wrapping hides.
So what? Any other? I'm sure there's a fair bit of mischief in your high school time.
Yes.
Any other stories?
Well, yeah, we had trouble keeping English teachers. We were very bad, but mistreating our English teachers. I mean, usually they were first-year teachers, and you could cause lots of problems without doing anything really wrong, but they would get quite nervous about it.
And how would they discipline? Was it before where they use the ruler? Or
Well, no, we had detention slips, and you'd get a detention slip, and you'd have to stay after school and do something, whatever. Of course, I didn't go in there very often, but I knew the routine.
So you graduated in 1944.
1944, and it was an unknown what was going to happen to the guys in the class because the draft was still active. And we all, one of the school board members had a son in our class, and he wanted to make sure that he had as many credits in math and so forth. So he arranged to get a trigonometry course into our curriculum, which he didn't have before that. And we had about 8 fellows in that trig course, and one guy had the answers all the time. He was my neighbor, and he wasn't that astute, but he always had the answers. And it took us about 4 months, and we found out that he had the one book that had the answers in the back.
And didn't tell anybody.
He didn't tell anybody, but he could always get the answer. But if you'd ask him how he did it, he didn't always know. Carl Deese, I thought that was kind of mean of him, but
So was it common to be in high school, smaller high school, to see guys constantly getting shipped off, the older classes getting drafted and sent?
Yes, well, see, I was on the tail end. I don't know if I'd have been drafted or not because the war was close to being over, but I didn't want to be drafted. So in my senior year, I enlisted in the Air Force, or I took the aptitude test for the Air Force, and I passed the aptitude test. And then we had to go to Truex Field in Madison to take the physical. And I didn't pass the eye test. They said I had diplopia of the primary position, which meant I saw double. I don't know.
Is that from the skunk?
I don't know, it could be. But anyhow, I failed, but my buddy Ivy Moulter, who we did everything together, he got into the Air Force. He didn't end up being a pilot or anything. I thought I could be a navigator because I was always good at math, and math was real easy for me. So I came home and I said, well, I still don't want to be drafted. So I took the Captain 80 test, which was Air Force electronic gear. And I passed that test. And I also passed a physical, and I got ready to go into the Navy. But September 14th, 1944, I was working in the candy factory. I could start working at the candy factory when I was 16. Although heretofore I worked in the grocery store, I could work there when I was 14, 15. So I worked in the candy factory, and that was my training really for my vocation after I got out of school. And September 14th, I put my class ring on for some goofy reason, and I was running the filler, and the filler has a closing machine that puts the caps on the machine, and there's a big turret that goes around and rolls the cover onto the can. And there was one thread of an oil plug on that rotating main frame that picked up my ring and pulled me into the machine. And there was a space that I couldn't get my hand in, and my hand went in all the way up to here, and here was this rotor going around, but I had enough relief there that it didn't keep pulling, but it was past my elbow. And my dad was the maintenance guy there. So one of the fellows from the office came out, he said, well, we got to turn it backwards. Well, you know what would happen because it was against the right angle and the elbow wouldn't go through the race. And I held onto the flywheel. I said, get my dad. So my dad came and started taking the machine apart. There was a big heavy arm over the top that held the bearing of that turret. And they had all the bolts taken loose and they didn't fall away, but then there was 4 dowels on there, and I can just see him cutting those dowels with a hacksaw, and then the thing fell away, and then I was relieved of it. And I ended up with a bad friction burn. I ended up being in the hospital for 6 weeks.
Wow.
And I got a skin graft under. They took skin off my legs and both of my legs, and I could have stayed out of the service by telling them my arm hurt, but I wanted to get in the service. So doctor said, you're 5% disabled. So I went to the Navy and they accepted that. They took me in and I got into the radar program and I went to boot camp. Then I went to primary radio school at Great Lakes. Then I went to the secondary school in Chicago. That was Wright Junior High School. And there was an NCO that was one of the teachers. He wasn't a very good teacher, but he had great stories on his service in North Africa and Italy and so forth. And he was worried that the class wouldn't pass the test because he had spent too much time telling stories. And he knew I knew the work, that I wouldn't have any problem with the test. So he gave me a copy of the test and said, you ask questions of me that will steer the class to the point where they can pass the test. So what do you do? So I studied the test and I disguised some questions and we passed the class. Can you imagine that? You probably could be court-martialed for it, but
Sounds similar to you sharing your algebra homework in high school.
yeah.